The first time it happened, I was dozing in the third-floor supply closet, my unofficial break room during the graveyard shift. One moment I was drifting off. The next I was wide awake but completely paralyzed, unable to move anything except my eyes. A figure stood in the doorway, an elderly man in a hospital gown, his skin gray, IV port still taped to his arm. He watched me with milky eyes, his head tilted at an impossible angle. I tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. The old man drifted closer, his feet not quite touching the floor. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, lips moving as if trying to speak. Then suddenly, I could move again. I jerked upright, gasping, alone in the supply closet. Just a dream, I told myself. Just stress and exhaustion playing tricks. My name is Marcus Reyes. I've been a night janitor at Westlake Memorial Hospital for almost 7 months. It's not glamorous work, but the pay is decent, and the solitude suits me. Midnight to 8 a.m. 5 nights a week, I clean the rooms of the recently discharged, mop hallways, and sanitize whatever needs sanitizing. Hospitals are strange places at night, all fluorescent lighting and empty corridors, the occasional nurse or doctor hurrying past. You get used to the quiet, the distant beeping of machines, the soft moans of patients. You learn to be invisible, to work around the sleeping and the suffering without disturbing either. What you don't get used to are the deaths. They happen more often at night, that liminal space between one day and the next when the body's defenses are at their lowest. The hospital staff call 3 a.m. the witching hour, because that's when most patients crash. I've wheeled my cleaning cart past rooms where the sudden silence of a flatlined monitor is followed by the controlled chaos of a code blue. After the first sleep paralysis episode, I tried to be more careful about my breaks, setting alarms, drinking more coffee, choosing busier areas to rest, but the episodes continued, becoming more frequent and more vivid. The second time I dozed off in the 5th floor waiting area. Again I woke paralyzed. This time a young woman in scrubs stood before me, a surgical mask hanging loose around, her neck revealing the deep gash across her throat. The third time it was a child, maybe 6 or 7, his hospital gown soaked through with water, skin bloated and pale. Each time, they would approach, try to communicate, then vanish when I broke free of the paralysis. I've never been superstitious. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that nonsense. But after the 5th episode, I started asking questions. "Hey, Diane," I said casually to one of the night nurses I'd become friendly with. "Did an elderly man pass away recently? Tall, thin, maybe in his 80s. She looked up from her charting. "Mr. Abernathy?" "Yeah, about 2 weeks ago, cardiac arrest. Why do you ask?" I described the man from my first episode. Her expression changed. "That's exactly what he looked like. Did you know him?" I shook my head. "Just curious." "What about a young nurse? Dark hair, would have had an injury to her neck?" Diane's face paled. "Are you talking about Rebecca? She was a surgical resident who died here about a month ago. Cut her throat in one of the on-call rooms." She lowered her voice. "How do you know about these people, Marcus?" I mumbled something about overhearing conversations and quickly changed the subject. But inside my mind was racing. How was I seeing detailed apparitions of people who had died in the hospital? People I'd never met or even heard about. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I used my master key to access the hospital's records room during my shift. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found it. A logbook of patient deaths, organized by date and location, within the hospital. I cross-referenced the locations with where I'd experienced my episodes. The pattern was undeniable. Each of my sleep paralysis events had occurred in or near spaces where someone had died within the previous 6 weeks. Mr. Abernathy had coded in room 312, just across from the supply closet where I'd first seen him. Rebecca Chen had taken her life in the doctor's lounge on the 5th floor, one door down from the waiting area where I'd had my second episode. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe I'd subconsciously overheard staff discussing these deaths. Maybe my brain was constructing these images from fragments of conversations. But then things escalated. I was mopping the pediatric ward when I glanced up and saw the drowned boy from my third episode standing at the end of the hallway. I wasn't asleep, I wasn't paralyzed. He was just there, water pooling beneath his feet, his eyes fixed on mine. When I blinked, he was gone. It happened again the next night. Mr. Abernathy standing beside an empty bed I was cleaning, his mouth moving silently. Then again with Rebecca, her reflection appearing in a window I was wiping down. I was seeing them while awake now, and they were becoming more substantial, more present. You're just tired, I told myself. Working too many shifts, not getting enough sleep, but I knew it was more than that. Something was happening to me, something connected to this hospital and these deaths. I started researching sleep paralysis, reading medical journals and psychological studies. Most described it as a neurological phenomenon, the body remaining in REM atonia, the paralysis that prevents us from acting out our dreams, while the mind awakens. The hallucinations were explained as dream imagery overlapping with waking perception. None of the research explained how I could hallucinate specific details about people who had died in the hospital, people I'd never met. Then I found an obscure paper by Dr. Eleanor Voss titled Liminal Consciousness, Sleep Paralysis as a Perceptual Gateway. Voss theorized that sleep paralysis represented a unique state of consciousness where the mind existed partially in normal reality and partially in what she called adjacent perceptual fields. She documented cases where sleep paralysis experiencers reported accurate information they couldn't have known through normal means, seeing events occurring in distant locations or perceiving entities that were later reported by others with no prior contact. The paper had been largely dismissed by the scientific community, but reading it sent chills down my spine. Voss described sleep paralysis not as a malfunction, but as an evolutionary adaptation, a state that allowed certain individuals to perceive aspects of reality normally filtered out by waking consciousness, including perhaps the lingering presence of the recently deceased. I needed to know more. Using the hospital's computer during my shift, I searched for information about Dr. Voss and discovered she had worked at Westlake Memorial 20 years earlier. Her research had been conducted here, in this very building. That night, I experienced the most intense episode yet. I dozed off in the basement break room and woke to find myself paralyzed and surrounded by all the entities I'd previously seen. Mr. Abernathy, Rebecca, the drowned boy, and others I'd glimpsed in passing. They formed a circle around me, their mouths moving in unison. For the first time I could hear them, not with my ears, but somehow directly in my mind. Their voices overlapped in a discordant chorus. Vessel, gateway, opening. Soon, when I broke free of the paralysis, I was drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But more disturbing than the episode itself was what I found when I checked my phone. 47 minutes had passed, far longer than any previous episode. Something was changing. The boundary between these episodes and normal wakefulness was becoming thinner. The next day, I called in sick and spent hours researching Westlake Memorial's history. The hospital had been built in 1967, replacing an older facility that had stood on the same ground since the 1920s. The architect, Dominic Thorne, had been known for his interest in what he called psychoenergetic design, the idea that buildings could be constructed to channel and amplify certain types of energy. Thorne had worked closely with a group called the Threshold Institute, which had funded several of his projects. The same institute that had employed Dr. Eleanor Voss decades later. Digging deeper, I found references to unusual phenomena reported throughout the hospital's history: equipment malfunctions, unexplained sounds, and most notably, a higher than average rate of patient deaths during the night shift. I returned to work the following night with a growing sense of dread. The hospital felt different somehow. The air heavier, the shadows deeper, the fluorescent lights buzzing at a frequency that set my teeth on edge. During my rounds, I noticed small details I'd overlooked before. The hospital's floor plan formed an elaborate geometric pattern when viewed from above. Certain corridors aligned precisely with the cardinal directions. The placement of support columns created specific angles and intersections throughout the building. It wasn't random. The entire structure had been designed according to some underlying pattern or purpose. Around 3 a.m., I was cleaning room 417 when all the equipment suddenly malfunctioned, monitors flickering, IV pumps beeping erratically. The temperature dropped so rapidly I could see my breath, and in the doorway stood Rebecca, more solid than I'd ever seen her, blood still flowing from the wound in her neck. "It's starting," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "You're the final component, the culmination of the design." Before I could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the floor. Code blue in room 423. As staff rushed past, Rebecca vanished. I followed the commotion to room 423, where a team was attempting to resuscitate an elderly woman. Despite their efforts, she flatlined. Time of death, 3:17 a.m., as they covered her face and began disconnecting equipment. I felt a strange pressure building in my head. The fluorescent lights flickered, and for a moment I saw her, the woman who had just died, standing beside her own body, looking confused and frightened. Our eyes met. She saw me seeing her. Then something impossible happened. She began moving toward me, drawn as if by some magnetic force. As she approached, her form became translucent, then dissipated entirely as it made contact with my body. I gasped, a cold sensation spreading through my chest. I could feel her inside me somehow. Her confusion, her fear, her dawning realization that she was no longer alive. I stumbled from the room, barely making it to a bathroom before collapsing. In the mirror, my reflection flickered between my face and hers, the boundaries between us temporarily blurred. "What's happening to me?" I whispered. "You're opening," came a voice behind me. Mr. Abernathy stood there, more substantial than ever. "You're becoming the gateway. Just as the building was designed to create you, you were designed to create us." "Create you?" I managed to ask. "A vessel that can perceive both states of being, a consciousness that bridges the gap. The architecture amplifies it, channels it. 20 years of preparation, of subtle adjustments to this building's energy. And now you, the final component." I fled the bathroom only to find the hospital transformed around me. The corridors seemed longer, the geometry subtly wrong. And everywhere I looked, I saw them. The dead of Westlake Memorial, decades of them growing more solid with each passing moment. I ran to the basement seeking escape, but instead found myself drawn to a door I'd never noticed before. Unmarked, heavy steel, requiring a key code. Without knowing how, I entered the correct sequence and the door swung open. Beyond lay a room that couldn't possibly exist within the building's footprint. A vast circular chamber with a domed ceiling, its walls covered in complex diagrams and equations. At its center stood a pedestal supporting an ancient-looking device, part mechanical, part organic, pulsing with an inner light. And waiting beside it was Dr. Eleanor Voss, not as she would appear now, 20 years later, but exactly as she looked in the photographs from her research papers. She smiled as I entered. "Right on schedule, Mr. Reyes, or should I say, Vessel 17. "You're not really here," I said, backing away. "You left the hospital decades ago." "Did I?" She circled the pedestal, trailing her fingers along its surface. "Time works differently, in liminal spaces. I've been here all along, waiting for the culmination. What is this place? What's happening to me? This is the nexus point, the heart of Dominic Thorne's design. As for what's happening to you," she gestured around the room, "you're fulfilling your purpose. Your unique neurological structure, combined with repeated exposure to the building's energetic pattern during the night shift, has transformed your consciousness into a perfect bridge between states of being. The sleep paralysis is merely the beginning stage, the opening of perceptual gateways. You've progressed beyond that now. You're actively channeling the recently deceased, allowing them to maintain coherence after physical death." I thought of the woman from room 423, the sensation of her consciousness merging with mine. Why? What's the purpose of all this? Dr. Voss's smile widened. Death has always been the great mystery, the final frontier of human knowledge. What if it could be overcome? Not through crude physical immortality, but through the preservation and transfer of consciousness itself. She approached the device at the center of the room. This is the threshold engine, the culmination of centuries of research. It requires a living consciousness, capable of perceiving and channeling the recently deceased. A vessel like you, Mr. Reyes. I never agreed to this, I said, anger rising through my fear. You were selected carefully. Your neurological profile, your family history of parasomnia, your social isolation, all perfect for our purposes. The night shift position was created specifically for you. The implications hit me like a physical blow. My entire life at Westlake Memorial, perhaps my entire existence, had been orchestrated for this moment. The patient deaths during my shifts, not all were natural, no, Dr. Voss admitted. Some were accelerated to maintain the necessary energy flow. The recently deceased provide the strongest connections. Horror washed over me. People had died to fuel whatever process was unfolding. I won't help you, I said, backing toward the door. Whatever you're planning stops now. It's already begun, Mr. Reyes. The moment you entered this room, the final sequence was initiated. The device at the center of the room began to pulse more rapidly, its light intensifying. The air thickened, becoming almost gelatinous, and around us the dead began to materialize, hundreds of them filling the chamber with their translucent forms. I recognized some from my episodes, but most were strangers, patients who had died at Westlake over decades. They moved toward me in unison, drawn by whatever power had been activated. What happens now? I asked, finding myself unable to move, though not from paralysis. The air itself seemed to hold me in place. Now, Dr. Voss said, her form beginning to flicker like a bad television signal, we complete the transition. The threshold engine will use your consciousness as a template, creating a permanent bridge between states of being. Death will no longer mean oblivion. Consciousness will continue anchored to this nexus point. And me? What happens to me? Her expression showed a flicker of something almost like sympathy. Your individual consciousness will be expanded, diffused across the network. A necessary sacrifice for a monumental advancement. In other words, I would cease to exist as myself. I would become the network, the bridge, the gateway, forever. As the entities closed in around me, the first time it happened, May thought it was just exhaustion. 3 months into the night shift rotation at Mercy General, and her body still hadn't adjusted to sleeping during daylight hours. The hospital was chronically understaffed, especially on nights, which meant 12-hour shifts often stretched to 14 or 15. Snatching 20-minute naps in the break room had become essential for survival. That night had been particularly brutal. A multi-car pileup had sent 8 critical patients to the ER, 3 of whom had been transferred to May's floor. One, an elderly man with extensive internal bleeding, had coded twice during her shift. The second time, they couldn't bring him back. During her 3 a.m. break, May had collapsed onto the ancient couch in the staff room, setting her phone alarm for 20 minutes. She'd fallen asleep almost instantly. Then came the paralysis. She'd experienced it before, that terrifying state between sleeping and waking where your mind is conscious but your body remains locked in sleep. Usually, it manifested as a crushing weight on her chest, a sense of malevolent presence in the room. This time was different. May's eyes opened, but she couldn't move, couldn't speak. The break room looked normal except for the strange bluish quality to the light. And the old man standing at the foot of the couch, Mr. Grayson, the patient who had died 2 hours earlier. He wasn't grotesque or bloody. He looked peaceful, almost healthy, certainly better than when she'd last seen him, gray-faced and surrounded by the controlled chaos of a code blue. He simply stood there, watching her with an expression of gentle curiosity. Behind him stood a woman May recognized from the previous week, a stroke patient who had never regained consciousness. Next to her was the young motorcycle accident victim from 3 nights ago. All patients who had died during May's shifts. They didn't speak or move toward her. They simply watched, their eyes reflecting a calm awareness that their living counterparts had lacked in their final hours. The paralysis lasted perhaps 30 seconds before May's phone alarm shattered the silence. She jolted upright, gasping to find the break room empty and normally lit. Just a stress dream, she told herself. A manifestation of guilt and exhaustion, but it happened again the next night, and the night after that. You ever have dreams about patients who've died? May asked casually, stirring her coffee in the hospital cafeteria. Across from her, Danny raised an eyebrow. After 5 years on night shift, nothing much surprised the veteran nurse. Sure. Occupational hazard, Danny said, taking a bite of her sandwich. Had a recurring one about that multi-organ failure guy from last summer for weeks. Brain's way of processing trauma. What about sleep paralysis? The demon sitting on your chest thing? God, I had that bad when I first started nights. Sleep. Specialists told me it's more common when your sleep schedule is disrupted. Danny studied May's face. You having episodes? May nodded, hesitant to share the full strangeness of her experiences. Just wondering if it's normal. Nothing about working nights is normal, honey. Our circadian rhythms are completely screwed. Danny's pager buzzed. She glanced at it and sighed. Bed 4 needs pain meds again. You good? Yeah, fine, May said, forcing a smile. Just tired. She didn't mention that during last night's episode, she'd seen an unfamiliar face among the dead. Patients, an elderly woman she didn't recognize. Or that 3 hours later, a patient matching that exact description had been transferred to their floor from the ER, only to code and die before dawn. By the 3rd week, May had developed a system. She kept a small notebook where she sketched the faces she saw during her paralysis episodes. Most were familiar, patients who had died during her shifts, but occasionally, new faces appeared. Like clockwork, those patients would arrive on her floor within hours, usually in critical condition. Despite her best efforts, checking on them more frequently, alerting doctors to the slightest changes in vitals, they always died. She began to dread her break time naps, but exhaustion gave her no choice. Without those 20 minutes of rest, she couldn't function through the grueling shifts. You look like hell, Dr. Patel told her bluntly one night as they reviewed a patient's chart at the nurse's station. Thanks, May replied dryly. I've been having trouble sleeping. Join the club, he said, though his appearance was immaculate as always. Unlike some doctors who treated nurses as glorified assistants, Patel was respectful, collaborative, one of the good ones. Seriously though, you should get that checked out. Sleep deprivation impairs judgment worse than alcohol. I know. I'm working on it. That night's paralysis episode was different. Among the silent observers was a face she recognized immediately. Not a patient, but a colleague. Sophia Kim, one of the respiratory therapists who often worked their floor. When May jolted awake, her heart was pounding so hard she felt nauseated. Sophia wasn't just a colleague, she was a friend. They'd started at Mercy around the same time, sometimes grabbed breakfast together after shifts, and according to May's increasingly accurate visions, Sophia was going to die. Soon. You're freaking me out, Sophia said the next morning as they sat in the hospital cafe. Why would you even joke about something like that? I'm not joking, May insisted, keeping her voice low. Look, I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy, it is crazy. You're saying your dreams are predicting patient deaths? And now I'm in them? Sophia stirred her tea aggressively. May, you need sleep, and maybe therapy. Not necessarily in that order. I've kept track. May pushed her notebook across the table. Every new face I see during an episode shows up on our floor within 24 hours, and they all die. Sophia glanced at the notebook but didn't open it. You're a night shift nurse in the ICU. You see a lot of deaths. Your brain is processing that trauma through dreams. They're not dreams, it's sleep paralysis. And I'm seeing these faces before the patients even arrive. Confirmation bias. You're remembering the hits and forgetting the misses. Sophia's expression softened. I'm worried about you. Maybe you should request a rotation back to days. May closed the notebook. Just be careful, okay? Maybe take a few days off. I can't. We're short-staffed, and I've got bills to pay. Sophia checked her watch. I need to go. I'm covering a double today. As Sophia walked away, May felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. She hadn't mentioned the worst part. In her vision, Sophia had been wearing the exact same scrubs she had on today. May wasn't scheduled that night, but she came in anyway, claiming she'd forgotten paperwork. The night shift supervisor gave her an odd look, but didn't question it. She found Sophia on the third floor checking ventilator settings for a post-surgical patient. Are you stalking me now? Sophia asked, though her tone was light. Just in the neighborhood, May said. Thought I'd see if you wanted to grab dinner on your break. Can't. We've got 3 vents and I'm the only RT tonight. Sophia adjusted. Something on the machine. Seriously, May, go home, get some sleep. I'll hang out in the break room. Keep you company when you're free. Sophia gave her a long look. This is about your dream, isn't it? You think something's going to happen to me tonight? May didn't deny it. Fine. I'm due for a break in about an hour. Meet me in the 3rd floor lounge and you can buy me a terrible sandwich from the vending machine. It wasn't much, but it was something. May spent the next hour wandering the hospital trying to look like she had a purpose. She checked the emergency exits, the stairwells, the medication rooms, searching for what she didn't know. Some looming danger that might threaten Sophia. When she returned to the 3rd floor, Sophia was nowhere to be found. She got called to the ER, a unit secretary told her. Some respiratory distress case coming in. May headed for the elevator, trying to calm her racing heart. This was ridiculous. She was chasing shadows based on a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor, and May nearly collided with Dr. Patel. May? I thought you were off tonight, he said, stepping into the elevator beside her. I am. Just checking on a friend. She pressed the button for the ER. You heading down too? He nodded, looking unusually tense. Got paged for a consult. They rode in silence. When the doors opened to the controlled chaos of the emergency department, May scanned the area for Sophia's distinctive purple scrubs. There she is, Patel said, pointing toward a trauma bay where a team was working on a patient. Sophia was visible among them, adjusting ventilator settings. May felt a rush of relief. Sophia was fine, working, focused, alive. I need to talk to her when she's done, May told Patel. Mind if I wait with you? He gave her an odd look. I suppose not. I'm heading to the medication room first. May followed him, still watching Sophia across the department. The trauma seemed to be stabilizing. The frantic energy of the team was subsiding into the more measured pace of routine care. The medication room was empty when they entered. Patel used his ID to access the automated dispensing cabinet, his back to May. So what's really going on? He asked casually, typing something into the system. You're not on shift, but you're following your RT friend around looking like you've seen a ghost. It's complicated, May said. I've been having these episodes during sleep paralysis. I see patients who died during my shifts. Hypnagogic hallucinations, common with sleep paralysis. He selected something from the cabinet. The thing is, sometimes I see patients before they arrive, before they die. May knew how it sounded, but she was beyond caring. Last night I saw Sophia. Patel turned, his expression unreadable. That must be disturbing. It's terrifying. Every person I've seen in these episodes has died within 24 hours of arriving on our floor. Every single one. Interesting. He was holding something behind his back now. And you think Sophia is in danger tonight? I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy at all. His voice had changed, become softer, more intimate. It sounds like you're more perceptive than I gave you credit for. A chill ran down May's spine. What do you mean? I mean, he said, stepping closer, that perhaps your subconscious has noticed patterns your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. Perhaps you've noticed things about certain patients, about their lab values, about how they deteriorate so quickly after I visit them. May took a step back, bumping against the door. Dr. Patel, what are you saying? I'm saying that your friend Sophia noticed something too. Asked too many questions about Mr. Abernathy's potassium levels last week. Started reviewing charts of patients who died on my service. He revealed what he'd been holding, a syringe. She's become a problem, just like you've become a problem. May's mind raced. The patients in her visions, they had all been under Patel's care. All had died unexpectedly despite initially stable conditions. You're killing them, she whispered. Why? Why does anyone do anything? Curiosity, power, the challenge of it. He shrugged. Does it matter? The important thing is that I've become quite good at it. Untraceable methods, perfect timing. Someone will figure it out. Doubtful. Healthcare is full of unexpected deaths. That's why hospitals have mortality reviews, morbidity conferences, systems designed to normalize the abnormal. He gestured with the syringe. Now I need you to be very quiet and very still. May's hand found the door handle behind her. Sophia doesn't know anything. She hasn't connected the dots. Perhaps not. But I can't take that risk. And now there's you, with your convenient visions, providing the perfect explanation for how you knew. His smile was chilling. Who would believe you? The sleep-deprived nurse having hallucinations about death. In one fluid motion, May yanked the door open and threw herself backward into the hallway. "Security!" she screamed. "Help!" Patel lunged after her, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. The syringe came down toward her neck, but May twisted, and it glanced off her shoulder instead. They grappled in the hallway, May continuing to scream for help. From the corner of her eye, she saw Sophia running toward them, followed by security guards. "She's having a psychotic episode," Patel was saying, his voice calm and authoritative despite the struggle. "Sleep deprivation-induced paranoia. I need help restraining her." "He's trying to kill me," May gasped. "He's been killing patients. Sophia, he was going to kill you next." The security guards looked uncertain, caught between the word of a respected doctor and a wild-eyed nurse. "Check the syringe," Sophia said sharply. "The one on the floor." One of the guards picked it up carefully. "Potassium chloride," Patel said smoothly. "I was preparing it for a critical patient when Nurse Chen burst in, making wild accusations." "Then you won't mind if we verify that with pharmacy," Sophia said, "and check which patient it was prescribed for." Something in Patel's expression changed, a flicker of calculation, of recalibration. "This is absurd. I don't have to justify myself to—" "Actually, you do," came a new voice. The hospital's chief of security had arrived, accompanied by more guards. "Dr. Patel, please step away from Nurse Chen." May felt Patel's grip loosen. She stumbled away from him into Sophia's steadying arms. "This is a misunderstanding," Patel was saying, his composure cracking slightly. "Nurse Chen has been experiencing sleep paralysis, hallucinations. She's not well. We'll sort it all out," the security chief said. "In the meantime, I need you to come with us. Both of you," he added, looking at May. As they were led in opposite directions, May caught Sophia's eye. "How did you know to believe me?" "I didn't. Not entirely," Sophia admitted. "But after you left this morning, I looked at your notebook. The patterns were too specific to ignore, so I started checking records, comparing death rates when Patel was on service versus when he wasn't." She squeezed May's arm. "I was coming to find you when all this happened." "He was going to kill you," May said, the reality of it hitting her anew. "Because you were asking questions. Well, he failed." Sophia's expression was grim. "And now we're going to make sure he never hurts anyone else. The investigation took months. Once authorities began looking closely at Patel's cases, the pattern became clear. 17 suspicious deaths over 2 years, all made to look like natural progressions of existing conditions. Toxicology tests on his most recent victims revealed elevated potassium levels consistent with external administration. May gave statements to police, hospital administrators, and eventually prosecutors. She downplayed the sleep paralysis visions, focusing instead on the observable patterns she documented. No one needed to know that her investigation had begun with visitations from the dead. The night before Patel's preliminary hearing, May experienced sleep paralysis one final time. She opened her eyes to find her bedroom filled with now familiar faces, the patients who had died during her shifts. But this time, they weren't simply watching. One by one, they nodded to her, their expressions peaceful, almost grateful. Then, they were gone, leaving May alone in the darkness, finally able to move, to breathe, to begin healing. She never saw them again. 6 months later, May sat across from her therapist, Dr. Rivera, in a comfortable office far from the hospital. "The sleep paralysis episodes have stopped completely?" Dr. Rivera asked. May nodded. "Since the night before the hearing, no paralysis, no visitations. And you're still working nights?" "Temporarily. I'm transitioning to days next month." May smiled. "Turns out I'm not cut out for the vampire schedule after all. How do you explain what happened? The visions that turned out to be predictive?" It was a question May had asked herself countless times. "Scientifically, maybe my subconscious picked up on patterns I wasn't consciously aware of. Patel's presence when certain patients crashed, subtle changes in lab values. Maybe sleep paralysis just provided a framework for my brain to communicate that information. And less scientifically?" May hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe there's something that happens in that space between sleeping and waking. Some connection we don't understand." "To the dead? Or to truth?" May shrugged. "Either way, I'm just grateful it stopped. And that we caught him before he could hurt anyone else." Dr. Rivera made a note in her file. "And the guilt? We've talked about how night shift nurses often carry a heavy burden of guilt when patients die on their watch. It's better. I still think about them, especially the ones from before we knew what Patel was doing. But I understand now that their deaths weren't my fault." May paused. "Sometimes I think the visions were their way of helping me stop him, their way of finding justice. That's a comforting perspective." "It is." May smiled. "And I sleep better believing it." As she left the therapist's office, May's phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Verdict's in. Guilty on all counts. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" May typed back quickly. "Absolutely. My treat." She stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling its warmth on her face. For the first time in months, she was looking forward to sleeping tonight, deeply and dreamlessly, without visitations or paralysis. The dead had delivered their messages. Justice had been served. And May could finally rest. The Somnus Wing at Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital was unlike any medical facility I'd worked in before. Located in the hospital's oldest building, a Victorian-era structure separated from the main campus, it specialized in severe parasomnia. Disorders, night terrors, sleepwalking, and particularly, treatment-resistant sleep paralysis. I was excited when I got the night shift nursing position. 3 years of psychiatric nursing had prepared me for most things, but nothing prepared me for what I found in those quiet halls after midnight. My orientation was conducted by Dr. Eleanor Reeves, the wing's director, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. "The patients you'll be monitoring have exhausted conventional treatments," she explained as we walked the circular corridor. "Many have been experiencing paralysis episodes so severe they've attempted suicide rather than face another night." The ward contained 12 private rooms arranged in a perfect circle around a central nurses' station. Each room had observation windows and sophisticated monitoring equipment. "We record everything," Dr. Reeves said. "Vital signs, brain activity, muscle tension, even subtle changes in the room's electromagnetic field. Electromagnetic field? I asked. She gave me a measured look. We take a comprehensive approach to data collection, Nurse Chen. Sleep paralysis remains poorly understood from a neurological perspective. That first night was quiet. I monitored the patients, most heavily, sedated, and reviewed their charts. The medications were standard: antidepressants, anti-anxiety drugs, sedatives, but the dosages were unusually high. Around 3 a.m., the first incident occurred. The monitors for room 7 showed a spike in heart rate and brain activity. On the observation screen, I could see the patient, a middle-aged man named Martin, lying perfectly still despite his racing heart. I rushed to his room. Martin's eyes were open, darting frantically around the room, but his body remained completely immobile. His breathing was shallow and rapid. Following protocol, I spoke calmly while checking his vitals. "Martin, you're safe. You're experiencing sleep paralysis. It will pass in a moment." His eyes fixed on mine, filled with terror. Then they shifted to something behind me. I turned, seeing nothing. When I looked back, tears were streaming down Martin's face. Gradually, his body relaxed as the paralysis subsided. He gasped, finally able to move. "It was here," he whispered. "The tall one. It was standing right behind you." I documented the episode and helped Martin calm down enough to eventually fall back asleep. Later, reviewing the monitoring data, I noticed something odd. The electromagnetic field sensors had registered significant fluctuations during the episode, concentrated in the area behind where I had been standing. The next night, a different patient, a young woman named Eliza in room 3, experienced a similar episode. As I helped her recover, she described what she'd seen. "It had no face," she said, shivering despite the room's warmth. "Just smooth skin where features should be. And it was so tall it had to bend under the ceiling." A chill ran through me. Her description matched Martin's tall one exactly, though. According to their charts, they had never met or shared their experiences. Over the next week, I documented 8 more episodes across different patients. In 7 of them, the same faceless, elongated figure was described. The other episode featured what the patient called the children, small, shadowy figures that moved in unison around the bed. During my break, I searched the medical literature for studies on shared sleep paralysis hallucinations. While cultural factors often influenced what people saw during episodes, the consistency across our patients seemed unusual, particularly since they came from diverse backgrounds. I brought my observations to Dr. Reeves during our weekly staff meeting. "I've noticed patients describing identical entities during their episodes," I said. "Is this common?" Dr. Reeves didn't seem surprised. "We've documented similar patterns. It's one of the phenomena we're studying here. But how would they all see the same things without ever discussing it with each other?" She closed her folder deliberately. "What's your background in anthropology, Nurse Chen?" The question caught me off guard. "I took some courses in college." "Why?" "Sleep paralysis entities appear in folklore across cultures. The old hag, the hat man, the intruder. Carl Jung would call them manifestations of the collective unconscious. But these descriptions are so specific," I pressed. "The same height, the same featureless face. Document everything you observe," she said, effectively ending the conversation. "That's why you're here." Curiosity piqued, I began researching the hospital's history after my shifts. Blackwood had been built in 1887 on land previously occupied by a Puritan settlement. The Somnus Wing was the oldest section, originally housing patients with spiritual afflictions and nocturnal disturbances. The hospital archives were kept in the basement, rows of filing cabinets and shelves of leather-bound records. With my security clearance, I could access most of it, though certain sections were restricted. In a journal from 1890, I found the first reference to shared visions among patients in what was then called the Night Terrors Ward. The attending physician had documented multiple patients describing a most unusual visitation from an elongated figure, faceless and silent. The similarities to our current patients' experiences were uncanny. Digging deeper, I found architectural plans for the original building. The Somnus Wing was designed as a perfect circle, unusual for Victorian architecture. Notes in the margins referenced sacred geometry and amplification of liminal experiences. The hospital's founder, Dr. Augustus Blackwood, had apparently been obsessed with sleep disorders, particularly those involving what he called visitations. His personal journals revealed a belief that these weren't hallucinations, but actual encounters with beings from another plane of existence. One entry stood out. The land speaks through the sleeping mind. What the Wampanoag knew, what the settlers feared, it remains. The temple may be gone, but its purpose continues. Temple? I searched for more information about the land before the Puritan settlement. In the restricted section, I found a folder labeled Archaeological Survey 1885. Using my supervisor's password, left carelessly written on a sticky note, I accessed the file. The survey had uncovered evidence of a pre-colonial structure beneath where the hospital now stood. Stone foundations formed a circular pattern nearly identical to the Somnus Wing's layout. Artifacts suggested it had been a ceremonial site used by the indigenous Wampanoag people for rituals involving dreams and visions. According to the archaeologist's notes, local legends spoke of thin places where the boundary between worlds was permeable, particularly during states between wakefulness and sleep. The temple had been built to communicate with entities called the Watchers Between, beings that existed in this liminal space. More disturbing were references to sacrifices, individuals who would be given a special preparation that paralyzed the body while keeping the mind conscious, offering them as vessels for these entities to temporarily inhabit. I felt a chill as I connected these ancient practices to our modern treatment protocols. The sedatives we administered didn't prevent sleep paralysis. They induced a specific state of consciousness while ensuring patients couldn't physically respond. Were we unknowingly continuing some ancient ritual? That night, I paid closer attention to Dr. Reeves as she made her rounds. She spent an unusual amount of time in room 9 with a new patient, a teenage boy admitted after multiple suicide attempts following severe sleep paralysis episodes. Through the observation window, I watched her administer an injection that wasn't listed in his chart. Within minutes, his monitors showed the pattern I now recognized as sleep paralysis. Instead of intervening, Dr. Reeves pulled a chair beside his bed and waited, taking notes as the boy's eyes darted around the room in terror. The electromagnetic sensors showed massive fluctuations concentrated near the ceiling above his bed. After her rounds, I checked on the boy. He was awake, shaking uncontrollably. "It touched me," he whispered. "The tall one." It put its hand on my chest. I examined him and found 5 long red marks across his sternum, as if someone had dragged their fingers across his skin. This wasn't hallucination. Something physical had happened. Over the next week, I documented everything while pretending to follow protocols. 3 patients showed similar marks after their episodes. One elderly woman had bruising around her neck in the pattern of elongated fingers. I also discovered a disturbing pattern in the patient records. Over the past 5 years, 7 patients had died in the Somnus Wing, all classified as natural causes: heart failure, stroke, respiratory arrest, all during the night shift, all during documented sleep paralysis episodes. The most recent death had occurred just 2 months before I started. The patient, a middle-aged woman with no history of heart problems, had reportedly died of cardiac arrest during a particularly intense episode. The autopsy noted unexplained bruising around her heart, as if it had been squeezed. I needed to know what was really happening in the Somnus Wing. I decided to hide a personal camera in the ceiling of room 7, where Martin frequently experienced episodes. 3 nights later, it captured something I still struggled to explain. The footage begins normally. Martin lying in bed, the monitors showing he's entering REM sleep. At 3:17 a.m., the indicators for sleep paralysis appear. His eyes open, moving frantically. Then the air above his bed seems to distort like heat waves rising from pavement. A dark vertical shape gradually forms, taller than should be possible in the room, its upper portion bending along the ceiling. It has no distinct features except for long, thin limbs that end in elongated fingers. It stands motionless for several minutes, simply observing. Then it slowly leans down toward Martin's face. The distortion makes it difficult to see clearly, but it appears to be inhaling something from around his mouth and nose. A faint luminescence transfers from Martin to the entity. After approximately 7 minutes, it straightens and gradually fades from view. The monitors show Martin's vitals returning to normal as the paralysis subsides. I watched the footage 5 times, trying to convince myself it was a camera malfunction or trick of light, but combined with everything else I'd discovered, I couldn't deny what I was seeing. The next day, I confronted Dr. Reeves in her office, showing her the footage on my phone. She didn't seem shocked or frightened. Instead, she sighed deeply, as if relieved. "I've been waiting for someone observant enough to see it," she said. "Please sit down." What she told me over the next hour challenged everything I thought I knew about reality. Dr. Augustus Blackwood hadn't just built a hospital. He'd constructed a modern version of the ancient temple, designed to facilitate contact with these entities. His research had convinced him that what people experienced during sleep paralysis wasn't hallucination, but genuine interaction with beings that existed in a state between dimensions. They've been interacting with humans throughout history, Dr. Reeves explained. Ancient cultures understood this and built rituals around it. Modern medicine pathologized the experience, calling it disorder and disease. "What are they?" I asked. "We don't have adequate language to describe them," she said. "They exist primarily in a state of consciousness rather than physical space, though they can temporarily affect our reality during certain conditions. And the patients who died," her expression darkened. "Casualties of misunderstanding. The entities don't intend harm. They're feeding on a form of energy our bodies produce during certain brain states, like bees collecting nectar. Usually it's a small amount, harmless, but sometimes they take too much," I finished. She nodded. "We're learning to manage the interactions, to make them beneficial rather than dangerous. The entities possess knowledge, insights into consciousness and reality that could revolutionize our understanding of the mind." "You're experimenting on vulnerable patients," I said, anger rising. "We're continuing work that began thousands of years ago," she countered. "These entities have been reaching out to us throughout human history. We're finally learning their language." She opened a drawer and removed a journal, handwritten notes and diagrams spanning decades. "I can show you what we've learned. The patterns of communication, the knowledge they've shared. You could join our research." I stood up. "Those patients didn't consent to this. They came here seeking help with their sleep paralysis," she said. "We're giving them understanding instead of fear. Most would choose knowledge over ignorance if given the choice." "And those who died?" "Regrettable losses in pursuit of greater understanding." I left her office without responding, my mind racing. That night, I called in sick. I needed time to think, to decide what to do with what I'd learned. The next day, I received a package at my apartment, Dr. Blackwood's original journal and a note from Dr. Reeves. "Before you decide, read this. The entities are trying to communicate something important." Against my better judgment, I read it. Blackwood's writings were a mixture of scientific observation and mystical revelation. He described the entities not as predators, but as messengers, trying to warn humanity about something they perceived across the boundaries of time and dimension. The final pages contained repeated references to the thinning and the breach, events the entities were apparently trying to prevent by establishing stronger connections with human consciousness. That night, I experienced sleep paralysis for the first time in my life. I woke unable to move, my room filled with a presence I could feel but not fully see. In the corner, a tall, shadowy figure gradually took form. I recognized it immediately from my patient's descriptions. It approached slowly, bending down to my eye level. Where a face should have been, images began to form, like a screen displaying a sequence of events. I saw oceans rising, skies darkening, and something vast moving beneath the surface of reality, pressing against some invisible boundary. Then words formed in my mind, not heard, but directly understood. We need witnesses. We need anchors. The boundary weakens. When I could move again, I immediately wrote everything down. The experience hadn't felt malevolent. If anything, it carried a sense of urgent concern. I returned to work the next night with a decision made. I wouldn't expose the Somnus wing. Not yet. First, I needed to understand what was really happening. What these entities were trying to communicate. Dr. Reeves seemed to sense my decision without me saying anything. "You experienced contact," she said simply when she saw me. I nodded. "I need to know everything. The real purpose of this facility, what you've learned from these entities, and most importantly, how to ensure no more patients die." She smiled, slightly. "Welcome to the real work of the Night Terrors Ward, Nurse Chen. We have much to show you." That was 6 months ago. I'm still working at Blackwood, still documenting everything I see and experience. The entities continue to appear during patients' sleep paralysis episodes. But we've developed protocols to limit their energy consumption, preventing further deaths. What I've learned in these months has transformed my understanding of consciousness and reality. The entities exist in what Dr. Blackwood called the interstitial spaces, the gaps between defined states of being. They perceive time differently, seeing patterns and connections across what we experience as linear progression. And they're worried about something coming, something they've been trying to warn us about for centuries. I don't know if what we're doing is right. The ethical questions haunt me daily, but I've seen enough to believe that these entities are trying to communicate something vital, something that concerns all of humanity. So I continue to work the night shift, monitoring the patients in their circular rooms, documenting their encounters with beings from beyond the threshold of normal perception. And sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I feel the air thicken around me, and I know I'm not alone in the nurse's station. Something tall stands just behind me, watching, waiting, trying to make me understand what it knows is coming. I never wanted to work at Hillcrest Psychiatric, but night security jobs that pay above minimum wage are hard to come by in this town. The place had been abandoned for nearly 30 years, just sitting there on the edge of town like a rotting tooth. The first few nights were uneventful. I'd make my rounds every couple hours, check the perimeter, and spend the rest of my shift in the security office watching Netflix on my phone. The hospital was huge, 5 floors of crumbling corridors and empty rooms. Most of the furniture was gone, but random items remained. A rusted bed frame here, a moldy chair there. Night shifts mess with your sleep cycle, so I started taking short naps between rounds. Nothing serious, just 20 minutes to recharge. That's when it started. The first time I thought it was just an ordinary nightmare. I was lying on the small cot in the security office when I felt that familiar heaviness settle over my body. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Just my eyes darting around the room in panic. A figure appeared in the doorway, an elderly man in what looked like old-fashioned hospital pajamas. His eyes were sunken, skin hanging loose on his frame. He shuffled toward me, muttering something I couldn't quite hear. I tried to scream, to move, but my body wouldn't respond. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. I sat up gasping, sweat soaking through my uniform. Just sleep paralysis, I told myself. I'd had episodes before, though never this vivid. There were. Next night it happened again. Different patient this time, a young woman with matted hair and vacant eyes. She stood at the foot of my cot, staring. Behind her stood a man in a white coat, his face obscured by shadow. He placed electrodes on her temples while she remained perfectly still. After the third night of these episodes, I started digging into Hillcrest's history. The official records were sparse, opened in 1954, closed in 1987 due to budget cuts and changing approaches to mental health care. But online forums told a different story. Hillcrest had been known for its innovative approaches to treatment, particularly under Dr. Edmund Weiss, who ran the facility from 1968 to 1983. His specialty? Sleep therapy. I found an old medical journal article where Weiss described inducing temporary paralysis in patients to make them more receptive to suggestion. The paralyzed mind, he wrote, becomes a clean slate upon which we can write new patterns of behavior. That night, I brought a thermos of coffee, determined to stay awake. But somewhere around 3 a.m., I nodded off at the desk. This time was different. In my paralysis, I saw Dr. Weiss clearly. He stood over me, clipboard in hand, speaking as if dictating notes. Subject shows increased receptivity. Consciousness separation beginning. Temporal displacement possible within 72 hours. When I woke, my flashlight was missing. I found it 2 floors up in a room I hadn't visited during my rounds, room 417. The next day, I researched room 417. It had been Weiss's private treatment room, where he conducted his most experimental work. Former staff claimed patients would emerge from that room changed, compliant, but somehow empty. That night, I set up my phone to record me while I slept. When I reviewed the footage the next morning, my blood ran cold. The video showed me sitting up at 3:17 a.m., staring blankly ahead. At 3:19, I stood and walked out of frame. The timestamp showed I returned at 4:46, nearly an hour and a half later. The footage showed no sign of the paralysis I experienced. To the camera, I looked awake. I checked the building's security logs. During that missing time, doors had been opened on the 4th floor, including room 417. I decided to quit. Called my supervisor and told him I was done. He sounded disappointed but not surprised. Said I'd lasted longer than most. Just finish. The week, he said. We'll have someone by Friday. That night I fought sleep like my life depended on it. Paced the corridors, slapped my face, anything to stay awake. But around 4 a.m. I found myself sitting at the desk, head nodding. The paralysis came instantly. Dr. Weiss stood before me, but something was different. His eyes, they looked directly into mine with recognition. "You've been an excellent vessel," he said, his voice somehow inside my head. "Better than the others. Your mind has the right architecture." I tried to scream, to move, but nothing happened. "Sleep paralysis is merely a doorway," he continued. "A state where consciousness can be transferred. My body died decades ago, but my work continues." I felt a pressure building in my head, like something was being poured into my mind. "I've been borrowing you for short periods, but tonight, we complete the process." The pressure became unbearable. Through my frozen lips, I managed to force out a single word. "No." Weiss looked surprised. Resistance is unusual at this stage. With every ounce of will, I fought against the paralysis. My finger twitched. Then, my hand. Weiss's form flickered. Impressive, but temporary. I woke gasping, somehow on the floor of room 417. Dawn light filtered through broken blinds. I had no memory of coming here. On the dusty floor beside me lay an old recorder. When I pressed play, I heard my voice, but the words weren't mine. Subject integration proceeding as expected. Full consciousness transfer imminent. After 30 years, my work will finally continue. I quit that day. Told them to mail my last check. But sometimes, I wake up in strange places. Find notes written in my handwriting that I don't remember writing. And in the mirror, sometimes I catch my reflection smiling at me when I'm not smiling at all. The first time I painted one of them, it was pure therapy, a desperate attempt to exorcise the terror that visited me almost nightly. My therapist had suggested it. Externalize your fears, Maya. Take control of the narrative. I'd been experiencing sleep paralysis since college, but the episodes had intensified after my mother's death 3 years ago. 3 or 4 nights a week, I'd wake unable to move. My bedroom filled with presences I could sense but never fully comprehend. Dark figures at the foot of my bed, a weight on my chest. The feeling of being watched by something ancient and patient. That first painting was crude, acrylic on canvas. all harsh blacks and grays. I painted the figure that appeared most often, a tall, emaciated woman with impossibly long arms and hollow eye sockets. I called it the Watcher and hung it in my bedroom, a childish attempt to face my fear. I slept without paralysis that night for the first time in months, so I painted another. This time I used oils, taking more care with the details, the texture of the entity's skin like cracked leather, the subtle phosphorescence around its edges. I called this one the Visitor and hung it beside the first. Another night of peaceful sleep followed. By the sixth painting, I'd developed a routine. I'd wake from an episode and immediately sketch what I'd seen while the image was fresh in my mind. Later, I'd transfer it to canvas, working in a near-trance state, my brush capturing details I hadn't consciously registered, patterns on their skin, the strange geometries of their limbs, the quality of darkness they brought with them. Technique improved rapidly, as if guided by some external force. The paintings became hyper-realistic, capturing not just the appearance of these entities, but somehow their presence, the weight of their attention, the ancient patience in their posture. I quit my graphic design job to paint full-time, living off my modest inheritance from my mother. My small apartment filled with canvases, 17 different entities, each captured in meticulous detail. I might have continued in private obscurity if not for Diane, my only friend who still checked on me regularly. She worked at a small gallery in the arts district and stopped by one afternoon with takeout. "Jesus, Maya," she said, standing frozen in my living room, food forgotten in her hands. "What are these?" "Just working through some things," I said, suddenly self-conscious. She approached the Watcher, studying it with professional interest. I've never seen anything like this. The technique is incredible, but there's something else." She shivered visibly. "It feels like it's looking back at me." 3 weeks later, my work debuted at Diane's gallery in a show titled Nocturnal Visitors. I almost backed out multiple times, suddenly protective of these images that had become so personal. But Diane insisted the world needed to see them. The opening night exceeded everyone's expectations. Art critics, collectors, and curious locals packed the gallery. I stood in a corner, uncomfortable with the attention, watching people's reactions to my work. Most viewers showed the same pattern: initial appreciation of the technique, followed by visible discomfort, then a strange reluctance to look away. Several people appeared physically shaken after viewing the complete collection. "They're so familiar," I overheard one woman say, "like something from a forgotten nightmare." The reviews were rapturous. Halstead creates images of such disturbing power that viewers report physical reactions: cold sweats, shortness of breath, the sensation of being watched, wrote the critic from Art Forum. Whether depicting sleep paralysis hallucinations or accessing something deeper in our collective unconscious, these works demand attention. All 17 paintings sold that night, at prices that left me stunned. Diane immediately began planning a larger exhibition at a prestigious gallery downtown. That's when the emails started. The first came from a man in Oregon. "I saw your painting, The Breather, online. This is exactly what visits me during sleep paralysis, the same hunched posture, the same rhythmic chest movements. How did you know?" More followed, dozens, then hundreds of messages from people who recognized specific entities from their own sleep paralysis episodes. The details they described matched my paintings exactly, though I'd never published descriptions of the entities, only their images. "The one you call the Watcher has been visiting me since childhood. She stands in exactly that position, with her head tilted at that precise angle. The twins have tormented me for 20 years. You captured the way they move in perfect synchronization, how they never fully separate from each other." I began cataloging these responses, noting the consistency across descriptions from people who had never met or shared their experiences. The statistical probability of such specific shared hallucinations seemed impossible. Dr. Eleanor Voss, a neurologist specializing in sleep disorders, contacted me requesting a meeting. She'd been collecting accounts of sleep paralysis for decades and had seen my exhibition. "Your paintings have created quite a stir in my field," she said when we met at her university office. "The specificity of these entities in their recognition by multiple unconnected patients challenges our understanding of sleep paralysis as purely subjective hallucination." She showed me her research, thousands of sleep paralysis accounts categorized by the type of entity experienced. While there were broad categories, the intruder, the incubus, the vestibular, the specific entities I'd painted appeared across multiple accounts with remarkable consistency. "Either you've tapped into some kind of collective unconscious," she said, "or these experiences are not hallucinations at all." "What's the alternative?" I asked. She hesitated. "Some cultures believe sleep paralysis represents actual encounters with non-physical beings. The consistent nature of these experiences across cultures and throughout history is difficult to explain purely through neuroscience. As my reputation grew, so did my unease. I continued painting, unable to stop despite no longer experiencing sleep paralysis myself. The entities now came to me in regular dreams, posing as if for portraits, revealing details I hadn't noticed before. My second exhibition, The Watchers Between, featured 30 paintings, larger, more detailed, more disturbing than the first collection. It opened at the Brennan Gallery, one of the most prestigious contemporary art spaces in the city. The ICE gallery director insisted on a particular arrangement. The paintings hung in a specific pattern, forming a rough circle with the Watcher as the centerpiece. "It creates a natural flow," he explained, guiding viewers through the complete experience. On opening night, something strange happened. A young woman collapsed in the center of the gallery, her body rigid, eyes open but unseeing. Paramedics diagnosed a seizure, but she later described a classic sleep paralysis episode while fully awake in the gallery. By the end of the week, 3 more visitors had experienced similar episodes. People reported feeling watched even when alone in the gallery, and several staff members refused to stay after hours. The publicity only increased attendance. Lines formed around the block. My discomfort grew alongside my bank account. Then came the night I visited the gallery after hours. I wanted to see the exhibition without the crowds, to understand what was happening in that space. The gallery director gave me his key card. "Just set the alarm when you leave," he said. "And Maya, be careful. Something about that room feels different after dark." The gallery was transformed at night. Soft security lighting cast long shadows across the floor, and the paintings seemed to absorb what little light there was. Standing in the center of the arrangement, I felt a distinct pressure in the air, as if the atmosphere had thickened. I moved slowly around the circle, studying each painting. Had I really created these? The technique seemed beyond my abilities. The subtle layering of pigments, the precision of each brushstroke. In places, the canvas appeared to have depth that should have been impossible, as if the surface extended. When I completed the circuit and stood again before the Watcher, I felt a shift in the air behind me. The hairs on my arms rose. I knew without turning that I was no longer alone. Slowly, I turned to face the center of the gallery. There, in the space between the paintings, stood the Watcher, not on canvas, but present in the room, her form translucent, but unmistakable. As I stared, unable to move, other figures began to materialize beside her. The visitor, the breather, the twins, each one emerging from the space between their paintings and reality. I wasn't paralyzed, but I couldn't move, not from neurological malfunction, but from pure terror. The entities didn't approach me. They seemed more interested in the space itself, moving around the gallery as if testing its boundaries. The Watcher turned her hollow eye sockets toward me, and I felt a pressure in my mind. Not words, but concepts, forming directly in my consciousness. The anchors hold. The way opens. I understood then what I had done. Each painting wasn't just a representation. It was a window, a thinning of whatever barrier separated their reality from ours. And arranged, in this specific pattern, they created something larger. A portal, a doorway. I backed toward the exit, fumbling for the light switch. When fluorescent lights flooded the gallery, the entities dissipated like smoke. but I could still feel their presence, waiting just beyond perception. I called Dr. Voss the next morning. "The paintings are anchors," I explained, my voice shaking. "They're using them to manifest in our reality." Instead of dismissing me, she invited me to her lab. There, she showed me data from experiments she'd been conducting at the gallery with permission from the director. Electromagnetic field measurements, temperature fluctuations, and most disturbingly, brain activity readings from volunteer visitors. "We've documented microsleep episodes in approximately 40% of visitors," she explained. "Brief moments where the brain shows patterns consistent with REM sleep, despite the person being awake and walking around." "They're creating a bridge," I said, "using the emotional response to the artwork to pull people into a state between wakefulness and sleep, the state where they can be perceived." Dr. Voss nodded. "The arrangement matters too. We recorded stronger effects when the paintings were placed in their current configuration. I decided to end the exhibition immediately, but the gallery director resisted, citing contractual obligations and the exhibition's unprecedented success. "People are flying in from other countries to see these works," he argued. "We're booked solid for the next 3 months." That night I dreamed of all 17 entities from my first collection and all 30 from the second, arranged in a vast spiral pattern. At the center stood something I hadn't painted yet, a presence larger and more ancient than the others waiting to emerge. I woke knowing what I had to do. The next day I began a new painting, larger than any I'd created before. I worked feverishly, without sketches or planning, my brush moving with certainty across the canvas. What emerged was not an entity but a door, a massive ancient door carved with symbols I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The door was closed, but in the painting, it was clear that something on the other side was pushing against it, causing the wood to bulge slightly at its center. I titled it The Threshold and delivered it to the gallery myself, insisting it be hung in the center of the arrangement, replacing the Watcher as the focal point. The gallery director was reluctant, but eventually agreed, seduced by the painting's power and the promise of an even more impactful exhibition. That night I returned to the gallery with Dr. Voss and 2 of her colleagues, all equipped with instruments to measure what might happen. We waited until midnight, the hour when the barrier between states of consciousness is thinnest. As the clock struck 12, the temperature in the gallery dropped dramatically. The paintings seemed to vibrate on the walls, their surfaces rippling, slightly as if underwater. The entities began to appear, first as vague outlines, then with increasing solidity. They arranged themselves in a circle facing inward, their attention fixed on the threshold at the center. "What's happening?" whispered one of Dr. Voss's colleagues, his scientific skepticism crumbling as he witnessed the impossible. "They're trying to open it," I said, but I painted it closed. The entities began a slow rhythmic movement, swaying in unison. The air in the center of the gallery condensed, forming a vertical line of darkness that gradually widened. Dr. Voss's equipment sparked and shut down. "The electromagnetic readings are off the scale," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. I stepped forward, moving into the circle of entities. They parted to let me pass, their attention never leaving the forming portal. Standing before the threshold, I could feel the pressure from the other side, something vast and hungry pushing against the barrier, seeking entry. The painted door in the canvas bulged further, wood splintering around its edges. I understood then what the entities had been trying to communicate through my art. They weren't the threat. They were the wardens, the guardians of the threshold between worlds. My paintings hadn't summoned them. They had always been there, visible only in that liminal state between sleep and wakefulness. What I had inadvertently done was weaken the barrier they guarded, creating windows that could become doors. "What do I do?" I asked aloud. The Watcher turned to me, her hollow eyes somehow conveying urgency. Again, concepts formed in my mind. Unmake the anchors. Close the way. I knew what I had to do. I reached into my bag and removed the box cutter I'd brought just in case. Before anyone could stop me, I slashed through the threshold, cutting the canvas from top to bottom. The effect was immediate and violent. A concussive force threw us all backward. The forming portal collapsed with a sound like thunder. The entities flickered and faded, their forms dissolving into the darkness. One by one, I moved around the gallery, slashing each painting, ignoring the gallery director's horrified protests when he rushed in after hearing the commotion. With each destroyed canvas, the air grew lighter, the oppressive presence diminishing. When I reached the Watcher, the first entity I'd ever painted, I hesitated. In her hollow eyes, I saw something like gratitude. I made the cut quickly, a clean slash across the canvas. As the last painting was destroyed, the entities vanished completely. The gallery returned to normal, just a room with ruined artwork and confused, frightened people. The legal aftermath was predictable. I was sued by the gallery and collectors who had purchased my work. My reputation in the art world was destroyed. Dr. Voss stood by me, testifying about what she'd witnessed, which only served to damage her own academic standing. I don't paint anymore. I can't risk creating another anchor, another window between worlds. But I still experience sleep paralysis occasionally. The entities still visit, though they keep their distance now, watching from the corners of my bedroom. Sometimes, in that frozen state between sleep and wakefulness, the Watcher approaches my bed and leans down close to my face. In my mind, I hear her gratitude, but also her warning. The threshold holds for now. But there are other artists, other anchors forming, and what waits beyond is patient. I lie there, unable to move, understanding that my brief fame as the Paralysis painter was not random. I was chosen because I could see them clearly, could render them with enough power to create anchors in reality. And I wonder how many other artists throughout history have been visited in the night, their works serving as windows between worlds, their creations hanging in galleries and museums, silent anchors waiting to be arranged in the right pattern, to open a door that should remain forever closed. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.